Make it happen, Midori. Make it happen.
Am I getting next?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be back.
They're all live.
You're live? Adriana.
I'll be right back.
We're live.
We're live?
We're live. We are. We go 5 minutes. Thank you.
I know those guys. Yeah, the guys signed up.
To agree with the questionnaires. Should I get mine?
I'll text you the email address.
Yeah, I saw your stuff up there.
Might still be closed. There's like a lot.
About 10 questions.
No, sir. We have any room? You got some student questions? You got some student questions?
I hope so. We'll check it out.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We'll begin this in about a minute. We'll begin our portion in a minute. Thank you.
That's fine, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. We'll take it out.
Check.
No signs in here? Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Are you ready?
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us tonight at tonight's candidate forum, presented by the League of Women Voters of San Joaquin County, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People Stockton Branch, Delta College's Multimedia, Political Science, and History programs. I'm Rod Villagomez from KWDC 93.5 FM and the Delta College Radio Television Department. We want to welcome you all here tonight to tonight's candidate forum. It's easy to say, right? All right, listen, we want to thank you all again for being here. We also want to make a few announcements. Please, no signs, no hats, no t-shirts in here from any of the political candidates. We want to thank you. We also want to remind you that this is a public forum, but it is also one of respect. We want to give the representatives and the candidates our respect as much as they will give you their respect. So please maintain a certain level of decorum and professionalism during this debate. America likes to celebrate our peaceful exchanges of powers, and part of that is this process. So please respect the process. Hold any and all applause that you have throughout this entire debate. All right, and we also want to just say no cameras, no pictures, no filming of any kind. All right, unless you are a press person already. So without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator. He is the the history professor here at Delta College. He's Evan Wade.
Good evening. I want to thank you again for coming to Delta College for our candidates forum. We're here to hear from the two candidates for the California U.S. Congress Congressional District 9. And we have the incumbent, Congressman Jerry McNerney, and we have Mr. Tony Amador. And I want to briefly go over the rules and procedures for the format of the discussion for today. The candidates will have a minute for an opening statement. And then from there, they'll receive questions from our panel. And our panelists are from the League of Women Voters, Ms. Christine Farid, and from the NAACP, Ms. Lucretia Hawkins. After the minutes each for opening statements, they'll receive questions from the panelists, and they'll have a minute and a half to respond to each question. After the round of questions, there will be a minute and a half for the closing statement. And so with that, we'll go ahead and begin, and we'll start with Congressman McNerney first, a minute and a half for the opening statement. A minute, thank you. A minute for opening statements.
Well, thank you and good evening. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Delta College, and the NAACP for hosting this forum tonight. It's been my honor to gain the experience by representing the people of this district to know how to get things done. This means listening to the people I represent, it means studying the issue, and it means working across party lines with people I may not agree with. I've been accessible, I've responded to the concerns of my constituents, and I've acted to change for the better. The vets have been a high priority for me. I've delivered legislation, and I've delivered the French Camp Health Facility. I've been the strongest voice protecting the Delta and fighting the tunnels. I've met with police chiefs and community leaders across the district to understand how to make our streets safer. I've got a solid record of accomplishment, and I want to thank you for trusting me, and if re-elected, I will work as hard as I can to continue to improve this district. Thank you.
My time doesn't start until I start talking, right? All right. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's the first time, actually, that the Congressman and I have ever been side to side, been able to answer the same questions. The first hope I want to make is not introducing my wife, who is here, who's part of the team, Amador. So she's here in the audience. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself very quickly. I have an extensive law enforcement background by way of LAPD. I retired as U.S. Marshal. I'm one of those also that was had worked in both districts, in that I worked for Jerry Brown as director of the California Youth Authority. My priorities also are law enforcement, economic development, and the reason I'm running is because I think we've had 10 years of malaise, and I think it's time for a change. If you think your life is better today than it was 8 or 10 years ago, then fine, you have an option to continue the things the way they are. But what I like to do is I like to point out the differences in my candidacy and the incumbent's status. Thank you.
And Ms. Christine Farid of the League of Women Voters will have a first question, and we'll ask Mr. Amador to respond first to the first question.
Good evening. What, in your opinion, are desirable components of a comprehensive immigration reform bill?
The comprehensive immigration reform bill has to start with the sovereign right that a nation has to secure their borders. It is not without human consideration, humane considerations. I will tell you that as a child of a mother who was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and my dad was born in Durango, my wife was born in León, Guanajuato, Mexico, we understand the challenges of immigrants. Our country was built on immigration, but what we have to do is differentiate between the magical words of legal versus illegal. We're moving into a phase now where we have to consider people who are coming into our country who do not like us, that cannot and do not want to acculturate. They believe in Sharia law, and I don't want any misunderstanding. It is not an anti-Muslim, it's a radical Muslim statement that I'm making, and so we have to vet people. The majority of the people that come into this country illegal, 40% overstay their visas. They are not people that are swarming across the borders. We have people coming from the southern borders of Mexico into Mexico. If you want to know what Mexico does with their immigration plan, just go down there and see how brutal they are with the people coming in from South America. So we do need a comprehensive immigration look. We need to have a worker exchange program where the heart of our industry here is agriculture. We have to have a program where we can have exchange workers. We have to reduce, as far as immigration, those people who are being taken advantage of by big corporations. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. This is an important and emotional question, and I think it needs thoughtful consideration. This country is a country built by immigrants. Some of our most innovative thinkers in Silicon Valley are immigrants. Many of the jobs that are being created being created by immigrants, so we need to be thoughtful in terms of how we develop policy. I supported the comprehensive immigration package that the United States Senate passed in the last Congress, and that meant finding background checks, making sure that people had background checks, and being sure that people paid their taxes, but it also offered a path to citizenship, including legal status, so that people don't have to live in the shadows. I think it's very important to work in a bipartisan way to find solutions that satisfy our country's needs. Unfortunately, my opponent supports the Trump plan of building a wall across between our two nations and creating a deportation force that will rip 12 million families apart, ship people overseas, and greatly harm our economy. That's the kind of plan I think that will be very dangerous and very destructive to our nation and the kind of people we want to be. Thank you.
Before we begin our next question, I just want to announce that there's members of the League of Women Voters who are passing around note cards, and you have a chance as an audience to ask a question to our candidates. If you're interested, just look for a note card that's coming around. Our session will be 45 minutes, and within the 45 minutes framework, we hope to get to some questions that will be coming from the audience. And so if you'd like to just raise your hand to get a note card. Our next question will be coming from Ms. Lucretia Hawkins of the NAACP, and it will be directed to Congressman McNerney first.
Good evening. There is a move in Congress to extend the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. What is your position?
I think that's an excellent idea. The Equal Rights Amendment is long overdue. We need equal pay for equal work. We need family leave for maternity and paternity. We need considerations that are based on that amendment that'll improve our society, it'll make our society much more productive. That amendment passed the House and the Senate by the required 2/3, and it only missed becoming a constitutional amendment by 1 or 2 states several decades ago. I think it's time we revisit that amendment and see if we can make that happen. And this time, we shouldn't put a time on it. On that amendment, there was a timeline that caused it to time out. And this time, if we leave it open-ended, I think it has a much better chance of passing. So I would full-heartedly support that effort.
That would be the first piece of legislation I've heard of in Congress that has a drop-dead date and would have to be redone as far as equal rights. I think when we talk about equal rights, when we're talking about all minorities or all people that are in a minority status, we have to do more than make them dependent on government. We have to empower them to help themselves also. We see too many times in the inner cities the answer being the federal government will take care of your challenges. I think we have to do more to create jobs, make a safe environment. As I said, even in this area, we have a challenge in keeping our community safe. I voted for Measure A, was a strong proponent of that, to support police, but on balance, we have to have a police department that's responsible to the community. We do not want federal officers coming in and taking over. And when we talk about equal rights, it begins also with justice for individuals that are in harm's way and the good taxpayers that are being victimized by gangs, and they're gangs of different nationalities also. So I am a strong supporter of equal rights.
Next question will be addressed to Mr. Amador first.
What specifically should be done to counteract terrorism in the United States and abroad?
To counteract terrorism here, we have to vet people that are coming into the country. And there's nothing wrong with doing it in Syria rather than here. If you looked at the pictures of all those healthy males running across the border, there were not children and women in that group. And so we find people that have not acculturated, have not been part of society. I think that once they understand that this country, we represent one flag and one nation, it makes it easier. There's less homegrown terrorists that'll be a result of that. We have seen some of the policies that have failed overseas as far as securing our nation from over there. I'm not a proponent of going over there, sending our young folks over there to fight battles that have been being waged for centuries. I think that one way we can do it is make sure that we have an interest here. We should only be overseas for humanitarian or for self-defense purposes. I think it's gone beyond that now, and we're in areas we shouldn't be. But clearly, security internally is not just an alien or people from other countries coming in. Security also means security in your own neighborhood, being safe from crime. And that's something that we should emphasize. I would have that bully pulpit with my experience in law enforcement to secure security inside of our borders also.
Well, thank you. Again, this is a hardly charged and emotional issue, but terrorism starts overseas. What we need are policies that allow our country to help tamp down and destroy terrorist networks overseas. That means containing ISIS. It means using our diplomatic, our economic, our covert resources to destroy these organizations that do nothing but cause terror in this country and around the world. Sending troops overseas, I think, has been counterproductive to these. Sending troops overseas to these hotspots has been counterproductive. So we need to work with the local countries, the neighboring countries, and the countries that have these organizations interior to try and find ways to fight this outbreak of violence. We need good vetting, and I agree with my opponent about that. People that come into this country should be vetted and need to be vetted, and they are being vetted. And we need to work on the internet. We need to find ways, using technology and using human resources, to track down the sources of internet recruiting and do what we can to stop that, because much of our terrorism and domestic is caused by people that are recruited overseas and fall into some sort of ideology that convinces them that it's okay to kill people. And that's something we can do using manpower and technology.
Congressman McNerney will respond to the next question first.
What should the top priorities be on campaign finance reform?
Well, you know, this is an area I feel very strongly about. Since the Citizens United decision and related decision, so much money has come into the political system that is poisoning our system and keeping it from working. If you feel strongly about an issue as immigration reform or gun violence or climate change, these issues are being held up because of the way campaigns are financed. So we need to find a way to move forward. Now, I've proposed a constitutional amendment that will stop PACs, it will stop super PACs, it will dry up those sources of money. But we need to work together across the aisle, and because of that, I've formed a bipartisan congressional caucus on campaign finance reform. We've had famous speakers in, like Professor Lessig, the Harvard professor who ran for the presidency this election. In fact, we're talking among ourselves. Transparency is an issue that we need to consider. I think that's something that we can get a bipartisan consensus on. We need to look at limiting donations. We need to look at limiting contributions. But I can tell you what, until we get campaign finance reform improved and settled, we're going to continue to have deadlock in Washington. It's a very high priority. Until we get that done, we're not going to get much else done in Washington.
Just a question, is campaign finance reform, was that your question?
Yes.
I feel like both the Republican and Democrat Party are corrupt as far as finance and taking from big corporations. That's coming to light more and more every day. My opponent, the congressman, has about $1 million. I have less than $25,000. You can buy a lot of volunteers for that with signs with $1 million. So the system is not fair right now the way it is. But when we attack legislation such as Citizens United, that passed the highest test you can have, and that's the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court has ruled that that's your First Amendment right, and you have a right of expression. You have a right to spend your money, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, the way you want to. Now, when we talk about reform, we talk about finance reform, we ought to talk about big corporations that are giving money to both parties, because they're both corrupt as far as I'm concerned.
And the next question, Mr. Amador will respond first.
Do you believe climate change is real and controllable? If so, what should the federal government do to counteract the causes of climate change?
You sure you don't want Congressman McNerney to answer this first? Just kidding. All right, climate change. We have things that are unproven. I know that people throw out crazy charges and say, if you don't believe in climate change, then you don't understand science. Well, it's who's science and who decides what kind of science they're going to believe in. We can go back not 10 years, not 10,000 years. We can go back further than that and find that there have been impacts. There's cycles of things that happen, just like political cycles. My answer to that would be, the verdict is out. I don't think that with the technology we have, and I'll give you one example, we talk about hydrocarbons and burning fossil fuel. Right now, the cleanest form of energy is nuclear, and it's cleaner, small power. But because of the cottage industry in solar and wind, solar and wind, we have programs that are subsidized by the federal government. In fact, they're now investigating those companies that are being subsidized promoting these two industries. But the mindset of the public today is that, you know what, solar and wind is the way to go. But it has been proven to not be sustainable from a fiscal impact. It cannot sustain itself. But you're really fighting the political elements to say, hey, we can't do that anymore. I believe in renewable energy. I believe in hydroelectric power, but we're tearing down dams now. And so I think that's probably the original power that we could have used, and I'm not terrified about the climate change right now.
Well, thank you. That's another question I feel strongly about. Climate change is real. It's happening. It's a serious threat. If you all notice, we're living in a city that is at or below sea level. Rising sea levels and megastorms are a threat to this community, so we need to take it seriously. Now, there's several things that we can do. We can encourage renewable energy. I worked 20-some years developing wind energy technology that created thousands of jobs right here in Northern California, right in Altamont Pass, over in the Montezuma Hills. Solar energy, wind energy creates jobs, it creates value, it creates economy. We can encourage that. We can put a fee on carbon to reduce emissions slowly, gradually, in a predictable way, so that businesses know how to plan for the future. And we can use those fees either to distribute back to the community, in which case we'd see our economy improve. We'd see people being able to buy that efficient car they've been looking at in the showroom. They can improve their homes. Again, this would improve the economy. So there's very much that we can do that will help, and it'll not only will it fight climate change, but will improve the economy. And I think that's something that I'm fighting very hard on. I propose legislation. I'm going to work across, again, if you want to get things done in Washington, you have to work across the aisle. So we're going to work on a bipartisan basis to find a consensus on how we can move forward to fight climate change. Thank you.
I want to remind everyone that there are cards which were passed out where you can ask your own questions to our candidates. And very soon the League of Women Voters will be coming around to collect any cards with questions on them. We have 3 more questions from our panelists, and then we'll be getting to a couple of questions which were just collected. But Lucretia Hawkins will be asking the last question. We'll ask Congressman McNerney to respond first.
What role should the federal government play in helping to reduce gun violence?
Well, thank you. Another very important question. First of all, I want to say that I strongly support the Second Amendment, and in fact, I'm a gun owner. But the real question here is gun violence. We see 30,000 people killed by gun violence in this country every single year. Now, we have to do something about that. This is a healthcare emergency. It's a healthcare crisis. And what we need to do is take common sense steps. For example, we can prevent people that are on the no-fly list from buying weapons. What would be more common sense than keeping people that are on terrorist watch lists from buying guns? We can require background checks so that people that have issues that may lead to violence from getting guns. We can close the gun show loophole. I mean, these are common sense measures that will greatly reduce gun violence. I know that in some counties in this state, there's a county officer, a county sheriff's officer, whose job it is to take guns away from people that are on restraining orders. That saves lives. We need to take common sense steps that will save lives and reduce gun violence. We can't forget that Stockton, California was the first site of a mass school shooting. We can't forget that. We have to take steps to protect our citizens on the streets of this country and the streets of Stockton, and we need to do it as soon as we can. Unfortunately, Republicans in Congress absolutely refuse to take any steps to stop gun violence.
Well, I didn't say it was me. I think this is a very serious topic. When I was a police officer in Los Angeles, I found that everybody that was shot by a person who had a stolen gun, not a legal gun, whether there was a background check done on the original owner or not. We have police officers today who have challenges of people who have mental problems. We have to do extensive background checks. Both the Congressman and I support the Second Amendment. We may disagree on what the purpose of the Second Amendment is. I believe it's your right to defend yourself against your own federal government if the time ever came. Now, as far as the NRA, I believe I have an A rating and he has an F from the NRA, and they are strong proponents of the Second Amendment. But the challenges facing people as far as guns, you cannot outlaw and ban if that's what's inferred, guns and handguns, to solve other problems that we have in society. We have to train police officers better, we have to train the better public to say something to help us, but getting rid of all guns or banning guns would be unconstitutional. So I'd be very opposed to that. Related to gun violence is, you can see time after time after time. You put up a sign and tell someone who may not be stable, this is a gun-free zone, come in and shoot all the people you want. I think there are people that we shouldn't be posting signs like that. Thank you. Notice I didn't talk much longer.
And Mr. Amador will answer the next question first.
Is the Affordable Care Act helping or hurting? What, if anything, should be done differently?
Well, the Affordable Care Act, even Bill Clinton said that it's not all it should have been and that people are getting charged exorbitant fees. It's failing. It was never intended to be competitive between states. There's a lot of fixes that can be done to improve it. The people that was intended to help that did need insurance were not helped. Rates are skyrocketing. You look at the percentage amount, how much the rates are going up. You have insurance companies that are bailing out and leaving even California. I know there was one insurance company I had has left the state. We're now down to another insurance company. But anytime you have competition, you have a better system. It's just like school systems. If you have more competition, you have a better system. Right now, all the doctors really don't have any independence. They all work for pharmaceutical or hospitals. And so what it was intended to do, it is not doing unless it was intended to move us into a single-payer system. And that single-payer system is called socialism. If you want one system, you can have it just like Canada. The problem is, if you're in Canada, the waiting list is pretty big. Guess where you go to get your operation? You end up coming down to the United States. So it's not worked out. I won't indict the whole program because there are people that need insurance that fell through the gaps, but I think it needs to seriously be looked at again to be improved upon.
Well, again, thank you for that question. Let's look back a little ways. Before the Affordable Care Act was passed, we were seeing insurance rates increase 15%, 20% every single year. Moreover, we had 20 million people that were not insured, that had no access to health care except to go to emergency rooms, and of course, that increases local taxes. Now, with the Affordable Care Act, everyone has access to health care insurance. Now, not everyone's buying it, but that's improving. We've seen the healthcare cost curve, which was increasing, we've seen that decreasing. We've seen improvement in Medicare costs. we're seeing significant improvements. More people are covered. You can't get thrown off your insurance policy because of a healthcare incident. You can't be denied health insurance. The healthcare, and I agree with my opponent, no legislation is perfect or anything that it could possibly be, but we need to work, again, across the aisle. We need cooperation to make this law better, to make this program better. And without cooperation, we're in a static mode, and the system is going to continue as it is. As much improvement as it's given, there's plenty of room for improvement. And I ask my colleagues on the other side, let's work together. Let's find a way to make health care affordable, to reduce the number of people that don't have access to health care at this time, and make sure that we have the quality health care that Americans expect.
This is our last question coming from the panel. It will be addressed to Congressman McNerney first.
There is desperate treatment of African Americans related to jobs in San Joaquin County, especially in the construction trades. What will you do to ensure oversight and that there is equitable inclusion of all minority groups, including women?
Okay, well that's a good question. It's a tough question. We can't force businesses to do things, but what we can do is require government contractors to follow certain rules, and those rules will help spread equality in employment practice and hiring for minorities and for women, and making sure that those folks have access to promotion for good work. So that's one thing that we can do, and I think we want to make sure that we provide education, equal education, good quality education for all the members of our society, so that we don't have pockets here and pockets there that are underqualified because of a lack of education and a lack of quality training. I want to point out that I've been very supportive of after-school programs, and I think it's important to give quality one-on-one attention to people and to help to make sure that we provide the funds for our schools to make sure that we have quality education for everyone. I think that's really the key. Of course, we want to make sure that there's no overt discrimination in the job. And we also want to make sure that people are aware of their internal biases. Every person on earth has an internal bias. How can we educate the people in this country that those biases are hurting our economic performance as a nation and hurting us as a people?
How do we improve job opportunities for minorities? Was that the question?
What will you do to ensure oversight and that there is equitable inclusion of all minority groups, including women?
We talk about minority groups. You've got to remember that the labor movement right now is controlled by certain people. There are certain minorities that aren't even able to get into labor unions. You have the city of Stockton trying to pass an agreement to give unions preference, and over 40% of the companies are small minority-owned companies here in San Joaquin County. You've got to make sure that type of legislation isn't passed that hurts minorities. You take a union like the Longshoremen's Union, they actually hand down their card to their relative. You and I would never get into the Longshoremen's Union. It would really be tough. So unions served a purpose, a good purpose at one time, but right now they, in essence, by effect, jeopardize and hurt minority and women from getting into some of these good trades. The best way to ensure and to help is to use the position as a bully pulpit. I'm a product of community colleges. I think that everybody can't be a STEM student. I think we need to have people ready by high school to be job ready, all minorities. I think minorities in community colleges, rather than getting rid of some of these trades, they ought to implement it and support it. And that's where the federal government would play a good role in supporting places like community colleges. I know that Dino Cortopassi gave about 20 scholarships of $10,000 each to people, and they were all minorities, to take a trade and learn a trade. So it's going to take that kind of infusion and leadership from the top to ensure that minorities have a better chance of getting good jobs.
We want to thank our panelists, Christine Fareed and Lucretia Hawkins, for asking questions. And we're now going to move into questions from the audience. And I'm going to try to get as many of these questions in as possible, as long as time permits, before we move on to closing statements. And whatever you guys can do as respondees in terms of consolidating the responses, that would be great. But you'll have 1.5 minutes max per response. The first question, and these are all anonymous, and this will be addressed first to Mr. Amador. Do you support a woman's right to choose what medical procedures they can have, or do you think that government should legislate?
I don't think government should legislate. I think they should be out of the business. I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm number 12 of 14 brothers and sisters. I personally don't support abortion, but I would not criticize anybody for having. I have 4 daughters, and I respect a woman's right to do what they want to do. But it is not a role of government to pay for those type of medical procedures, if that's the question. If the question is more extensive and broadly about health in general, I think that what we have to do is understand in the Constitution that health and welfare is a responsibility of the state, and the federal government plays a role in it, but they're not the primary people to ensure that good health is taken care of. I think once federal government encroaches on your lives and begins to come into your life, you lose your liberties. You lose your independence when the federal government or state government controls you.
Well, I thank you for that question, whoever asked it. I support women's right to choose outright. Now, what I want to say is that the best thing we can do is reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies by providing good health care, by providing education so that kids know what they're doing and getting into. So we're providing good jobs so that people don't feel trapped by poverty and in desperation go to do an abortion. So what we can do is provide incentives for these things so that we reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies, and don't enact policies that are going to increase the number of unwanted pregnancies. I support Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is an organization that provides health care for many, many women that have no other alternatives. We need to continue to support health care for women. We need to provide good jobs so that people don't feel trapped in poverty. And we need to provide education to prevent unwanted and unknowing children from having babies. Thank you.
The next question will be addressed to Congressman McNerney first. Why do you believe our nation spends so much on the prison system instead of schooling, when studies show that the higher education an individual has, the less likely they are to end up in prison? Why do you believe our nation spends so much on the prison system instead of schooling, when studies show that the higher education an individual has, the less likely they are to end up in prison?
Well, thank you. Again, a good question. And I want to thank the audience for participating here tonight. You've been great, and I appreciate that you're participating in this democratic process. Every dollar that we invest in education pays back our economy and our society. We need to invest more in education. We need to make sure that kids don't come out of colleges with mountains of debt. That's a tremendous burden on our society. And so spending so much money on prisons, locking up more and more people, hasn't made our society that much safer, if any. And so we need to find other ways to do it. We need to make sure that we have after-school programs. We need to make sure that we fund social programs that reach people. I recently provided legislation that will provide anti-truancy programs in a positive way. Those are the kind of things that are going to make a difference. Those are the kind of things that are going to keep people off of the pipeline of drugs and crime. And we need to be a lot more thoughtful about how we sentence our prisoners. If someone's not a violent prisoner or not a violent felon, then they should be given consideration. And so there's a lot we can do to reduce the prison population. I think we had misguided policies from about 1980 until recently that it's better to lock people up for longer and longer terms. It's been very expensive, it's been ineffective, and we need to change the way we think about that.
The question is, how do we reduce people in prison? I think the key word is education. What we have is a failure to emphasize that we should be working with younger people instead of worrying about someone having a safe space in college or having free doctorate degrees or higher education. We should be more concerned about a child reading in the 3rd grade, because if they can't read by the 3rd grade, they're going to turn to crime or be unemployed. And so we have to educate them. We have to get them through high school. People are dropping out of high school like crazy. And so if we don't get them educated, they will turn to crime for many things. Now, there are other things too that you have to be wary of. My law enforcement background tells me that if you change one law and make tar heroin a felony, but a rich man's using heroin or something else would get less of a sentence, then you don't have fair sentencing structures. And so we have too many people in prisons, but we also have a lot of federal prisoners in the state of California. And so as the director of the Youth Authority and as a parole board member, I can tell you our goal should be to get them out. But over 50% of everybody that was committed to the California Youth Authority read at a 5th grade education level, and they were under the influence of alcohol and or drugs. And so we have to be a government intervention to stop those things, and we would have less people in prison.
We have time for one more audience question. And after we conclude our forum, there's a meet and greet happening across the street in Banner Hall. And so please feel free to stay around, to go across the street and ask your questions directly to our candidates if your question does not have an opportunity to be addressed from the audience today. Our last question, and this will be addressed to Mr. Amador first. What is your stance on the Black Lives Matter movement?
On the what?
Black Lives Matter movement.
The Black Lives Matter movement is someone trying to communicate a message that we have problems in this country. But everybody in this room understands that my life matters, my wife's lives matter, everybody's lives matter. I was a police officer for 13 years. Police officers' lives matter. Do they make mistakes? Absolutely. Is anybody pure in this world and not making mistakes? They have their share of black police officers. But you cannot violate other people's rights. You can't demonstrate and end up beating other people because they are on the sidewalk innocently and laugh about it and put it on Facebook and say, boy, I got my shot in. And that's not what the Black Lives Matter is about. It is a political statement that we have problems in this country and challenges. And when you look at who is victimizing who, and you look at cities like Chicago and Ferguson and things like that, you know, Black Lives Matter, but we also have to fix the lawlessness that's going on in this country. We have to have respect for law to take our country back. So I am sympathetic in the sense that it is a message that we should listen to, but I do not believe it is a forum to violate other people's rights.
It's clear, the evidence is clear that African Americans have suffered more disproportionately at the hands of police officers and also Hispanic Americans. And so I think there's several things we can do. First of all, we need to make sure that our police departments are representative of the districts that they serve. I think that's a very important, but insufficient step. Secondly, we need to make sure that the police agencies train their officers to understand their own internal biases, so that when they pull somebody over, they'll understand what that person is going through, and they'll understand what their biases are leading them to in reducing violence. Now, I've recently introduced legislation to help fund training for police officers, both in terms of biases and also in terms of mental health, so that we don't have mental health situations escalating into unnecessary violence. Basically, I acknowledge police officers out there in a difficult world has to make very quick decisions that may involve life and death, and they deserve our respect, but they also need to be given sufficient training to avoid violent outcomes that are completely unnecessary.
We'll have a minute and a half for closing statements. We'll ask Mr. Amador to go first with closing statements, followed by Congressman McNerney.
I am running for office because I think the people of the 9th Congressional District deserve a representative, not a politician, not someone who is comfortable in having a position and the perks that come along with it. I think that if you look at some of the things that are going on, you need an activist representative to help our community at large, and the community includes everybody. It is not just black, brown, or white. I think what we have to do is understand that we have to bring jobs to this area and raise the community, not help special interests advance their money-making causes. I think we have to understand that we have to oppose things like a crazy high-speed rail down the middle of the counties and stop that money and use it. We have to stop. They have about $3 billion they need just to complete a leg of it right in the middle of the valley that ends in an orchard in Fresno. We have to have someone that uses the bully pulpit to make sure that water isn't transported out, but yet we support the farming industry here in the Central Valley. We have to have our security and jobs, otherwise we are not going to do any good as a representative for the people. So you just ask yourself one thing. If you think you are better off today than you were 10 years ago, or things have changed, then you can continue with the same practice. But if you want someone that would be action-oriented, I would love to have your support. Thank you.
Well, again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the other sponsors of this event. It's a great event, and I want to thank the participants here in the audience. Tonight's discussion has shown that I have a solid record of accomplishment. The Stockton Record endorsed me saying that I've been responsive to Valley farmers and that I've done something rare for a congressional representative, that I've immersed myself in local issues to help understand and reduce street crime. I passed the TBI, a traumatic brain injury law, to help veterans. I brought $193 million for the French Camp Facility for Veterans, and I've worked hard to make sure our veterans get the care they deserve. I've been the strongest voice in Washington to protect the Delta. I've fought hard against the tunnels. I'm fighting against pumping additional water from the Delta, but I'm also offering positive solutions so that California can develop solutions for its water challenges. I've been relentless in bringing infrastructure projects to the Port of Stockton, to the Stockton Airport, to I-5, Highway 99, Highway 205, RTD, Los Vaqueros expansion, the Delta Diablo, and Iron House Sanitary District. These projects create jobs and they create businesses. I've been an advocate for education funding, after-school funding, and after-school programs, youth funding like Youth Build and Youth Challenge that give young people a better life. I've fought outsourcing of American jobs, and I've been a champion for small businesses. It's been an honor to serve this community, and I hope the voters give me a chance and a privilege to serve them again.
We want to thank Congressman Jared McNerney and Mr. Tony Amador for coming and sharing their thoughts on today. You may now clap. The League of Women Voters, San Joaquin County, the NAACP Stockton Branch, Delta College Multimedia, History, and Political Science departments. We'd like to thank you for coming for our Candidates Forum on today. On tomorrow, we'll have another Candidates Forum here on campus. It'll be in the adjacent forum, right, in the South Forum, and that will be for the local city races, Stockton Board, Delta College Board of Trustees, City Council, and the mayoral race as well. There will be, across the pond, a meet and greet with the candidates. We encourage you to go across the pond to meet the candidates in Danner Hall. Also, if you are not yet registered to vote, October 24th is the last day to register to vote if you want to partake in the November 8th election. You can register to vote online at the Secretary of State's website, www.sos.ca.gov. If you have a California driver's license, California ID, or the last four of your Social Security with you, you can also go directly across the street to Danner Hall to register to vote. We have a voter registration table across the hall in Danner. Thank you and have a good night.